Hello and welcome to Stork'd, the podcast, in which we explore all the ways to build and define family. This is the podcast where we celebrate every unique way a family can look. I'm your host, Julia, and I am so thrilled to introduce Gertrude Lyons, Dr. Lyons, to you. She explores in the same way that I explore family and what does family mean and how does it feel to be in relationship with a family. And I, through the podcast, hope that I enable anyone to define family in whatever way feels right to them. Dr. Lyons explores the concept of mothering and motherhood. Wow. That's amazing. One of the most amazing concepts is that she does not believe you have to have kids in your life to be a mother. In fact, she thinks that there's this mother energy that permeates all of us and all of the things that we do. And so her work is about embracing your innate mothering and connecting to it, whether you are a mom of a human child or a fur baby or creative projects like a book or a nonprofit or something that you're devoting your creative energy to. That's what she tackles. In fact, she does it in some really interesting ways. One thing she does is she does coaching and support for people who think they want to be a mom, but don't really know if they want kids in their lives, or people who for sure know they want to be a mom, but don't know how to go become one. And for people who know for sure they don't want to be a mom, but want to get connected to that mothering energy. I love my conversation with Dr. Lyons. She and I bonded so much through an episode that I did on her podcast, through this episode, and then subsequent conversations. I think you're really going to love this episode. It's conceptual, it's juicy, it's tactical, it's all those good things that a podcast episode should be. If you get as much from it as I do from every conversation with Dr. Lyons, do me a favor and share this with somebody who might be feeling maybe disconnected from their own mothering, or like maybe they don't get to feel a connection to mothering because they've chosen not to have kids, or maybe somebody who's a new mom and needs to be embraced in all the mothering terminology can be for them. Somebody exploring their self-identity postpartum. That happened for me. Yeah, just share it broadly. And do me a favor and share Stork'd with anyone who might benefit from a Stork'd story. You can share us following us on Instagram, following the newsletter, Let's Start a Family, which is on Substack, sharing podcast episodes. Please give us great reviews. Here is Dr. Lyons. Dr. Lyons, I am so excited to have you here. I think our audience will learn so much from your various stories and all that you have to offer. So without leading the witness, let's hear a little bit about you.
That's great. Well, first of all, thank you, Julia, for so much for, inviting me on your podcast and that we get to spend this nice chunk of time. It's one of the things I love about podcasting. And, maybe that's related to the tell me about yourself, because I think of myself as, an explorer, a lifelong learner, someone who's always looking to stretch into new territory. And podcasting was definitely one of those a couple of years ago.
Well, before we press record, we were talking about how our professional lives inform our personal lives and our family lives and vice versa, how it's all just like this entangled mix in how we show up to the world. Can you help us untangle that for you? Tell us a little bit about who you are in your family life and then who you are in your personal life. And we'll go from there.
Okay, great. Yeah, no, I'm happy to, because they really are so intertwined and mixed. So I have 2 daughters and a husband. So I've been married. It'll be 33 years in June. So we have 2 daughters. They are 26 and 24. So we are an empty nester. And some people have trouble with that term. I don't know. I don't have a big thing about it, because I think one of the ways I look at mothering or motherhood is it is my job to prepare them to leave the nest, or the home. But have I prepared myself? So that's kind of where those have intertwined so much. And my journey has been so much about how each of those has informed each other, which then led me to where I'm today.
What I notice about Stork'd, one of the themes is that we talk to people at these moments of transition or just after the moments of transition upon reflection. And often the guests of Stork'd are at an earlier moment of transition. I want to create my family. I want to build my family. And I'm either stuck on an IVF journey, or I'm going through an adoption process, or, figuring out the solo parenting thing, or no kids. But there's other inflection points. And along the way, it's not just about the relationships that you're building, it's also who you're becoming.
Mm-hmm.
And so the inflection point of becoming an empty nester and that transition in your family life, I've never really thought about it from the perception of how does that influence or impact you, the parent?
Yeah, I know, right? You kind of think about it as the kids are these, I don't know, pictures we have of, life ends or something. I don't, there's a lot. I've seen it in my clients. I've seen it in my friends, that are at this stage. That was partly why what's infused the work that I'm doing, which is actually working more so with women in the earlier choices and stages of choosing if part of your mothering journey is to have children or not. And then, what's possible with that and that whole expanded notion of mothering. But that in whatever you choose to do, at some point, that season will end anytime we're kind of ending a season of our mothering, who am I now and what have I become and how has that launched me into the next one versus feel like, oh, like life's kind of over now that I don't have this career or these children to, put my full-time focus of mothering onto. So it's been a big deal. And the most recent place that I've kind of practiced what I preach was becoming a mother of the bride. I think I can't remember if I said that or not, but yeah, the oldest daughter just got married in February and they had, luckily for me, a nice long engagement, 1.5 years. And I love that word engagement, whether it's for, the soon to be bride and groom, but turns out it was for me, kind of engaging in what does this new phase mean? What does this mean for all of us? And so for me to look at what does this new phase bring up for me, stir up for me, and oh my gosh, I'm feeling a little emotional right now, like just thinking about it because I knew and I wanted it to stir stuff up. And some of it felt kind of obvious and some of it was actually unexpected, like things about how I did and we did our wedding that, I loved and I was the beginning of my growth journey. So I was like stepping out independently from my mom and some of the rules and myths and beliefs about how that was supposed to go and kind of doing it my way. But what did my daughter want? Like, did she want me part of it? Did she not? Like, not to presuppose, but then just kind of dig in deeper to other aspects of like where I was when I got married, where we are now. What is this? It kind of almost like another giving birth. And then like you were saying, there's so many transition points and inflection points, but this was a big one. Yeah. Like this is like the one where you kind of like really say, even though, they may leave your home for college and then, but this one, it's like, no, we are now. And they said this in their vows, like, we're building our family now. It's like, oh yeah, it was just like,
permanence to this transition.
Yeah.
It's so interesting because in some ways our work really parallels one another, right? I'm working through the context of a podcast, another medium, to unpack the word family and what that means, and also how our identity is shaped by that word. And your work is all about unpacking the word mother, motherhood, mothering, and how our identity is shaped by that. Can you talk a little bit about this moment in time, becoming a mother of a bride? And like, you said it's heavy. You said there's big emotions. You said it was this like major transition, but tell me about the feelings. Like what was coming up for you around who you are now that she's married?
Yeah, I think I touched every primary emotion, pretty deeply, like through the whole process: fear, hurt, anger, sadness, joy, and I'm grateful to have, space to like be able to be in all those emotions and everything from think and say the unsayable to just be in the pure joy of this celebration and acknowledgement of where she's at. But so you said a number of things, right? Like, yes, in Rewrite the Mother Code, like expanding the definition of mothering, motherhood, but also about family. And something interesting that happened, through my work in this phase of, her getting married was it brought me back to her conception, her birth, her, all of that. And there was some inflection points in that were really meaningful to me. And one of them relates to this, which was, when we decided after 6 years of being married that we wanted to start trying to have a family and invite a child into our life. It didn't happen immediately or immediately easy.
Right.
There was a whole part even in just my going off birth control and even being in the position to try that brought up a ton of feelings and identities around myself as a woman that, just to name probably the most unexpected and deepest thing that came up at that time was really seeing like this was something I thought I wanted. Of course, like I always said, I want to get married. I want to have kids. But why isn't like my body isn't even cooperating at this stage, let alone like get to the point.
The preconception phase was hard.
Yes, exactly. But in some of that work, like uncovering a really profound emotion of fear, I would even say like terror of becoming a mother. And so just the aspect of becoming a mother, but then there was also a lot of unfinished business and work with my own mom, such that, I was in a space of like, oh my God, I don't want to be a mom just like my mom had been.
Yeah.
And, that just like opened up and, oh my God, so many deep feelings that came up. And really, I think was the opening in addition to a lot of other holistic things I was doing that, opened the space, to start menstruating. So then we start trying to have a child and we're doing a lot of like really conscious kind of cool things at the time. And that's not happening. But I'm learning a lot along the way. And then we were on a trip. We were on a pilgrimage. My husband and I do these pilgrimages every year where we go and travel all over the world and kind of steep ourselves in whatever like those sacred places are, right? It's kind of our time to like really just focus on, our values, our mission, spirit, like through these spaces. And we were in Ireland and we were at a Mary grotto and I had this just really profound and like I'd never had something like this happen before where I felt like God was talking to me and the voice, whatever, you want to, however you interpret that or hear that for yourself. But in my mind, it sounded like a voice saying that no matter whether you and your husband, my husband's name is Rich, whether you and Rich have a child or not, you are a family.
Wow, that is so profound.
Somebody had probably maybe said that to me along the way, but it like, I get goosebumps and almost cried, pierced my heart. I was like, oh my gosh, like that is a truth. Like I allowed it, and kind of chose it to be a really profound truth in that moment. And it didn't suddenly mean like, oh, so does that mean we shouldn't have kids or that? It was just, it opened a space, right? Another space. And just to see how I was so entrenched in like, no, a family is you have a child, right? Like that's a family. Like, well, no, I think it's bigger than that, and it's who you decide to surround yourself with and, who are the people that are closest to you and who are you, and then right after that experience, like we literally conceived the next month. Right. So is it, but sometimes I think like that stress, that pressure, like when we can have some of these deeper release points, it definitely contributes. I still think there's other contributing factors. So
I think that's right. I think there's a sense of what I'm hearing you say is that you felt whole and complete in your family unit and that everything was additive.
yes.
And I think that's a really profound place to be whenever you're embarking on something new, whether you're entering a new relationship with a significant other and you're saying, I am in a great place personally. You're not going to fix anything or fill any missing pieces for me, but you're going to build and add to my life, It's a beautiful way to think about starting a family. We're awesome together. And wouldn't it be great if we added a child?
Yeah. And women like yourself that decide, I think it's the same thing there. Like I have an awesome life, right? Like I don't need a partner, need a child, need like this, perfect career to like make me a whole human, right? I am a whole human. And, oh, cool. Like I'm making a choice to invite other things into my life, and it could be a partner, it could be a child, it could be a lot of things, right?
I've heard the analogy of going shopping when hungry. right? When you're going to a grocery store and you're like, I am starving. The next thing you know, like the Tostitos and the Doritos and like anything that you can get your hands on is in the shopping cart. And when you go satiated and you say, okay, this is what I really feel like might add to my diet in the next week, you might find that you're choosing whole foods, that you're picking things that are just a little more well-rounded. At least it's going to be a less expensive trip. If you're going about life saying something is broken, I need to fill a hole, then the things you put into your shopping cart are not necessarily going to be wholesome. But if you go in feeling I am sated, I am satisfied, that's not to say, particularly when it comes to conception, that if you go in feeling satisfied, you're going to get your basket filled with a baby, but that at least the process will be a little bit less. I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but you know where I'm sort of going with this analogy.
Yeah, 100%. And then I want to just, if it's okay, like fast forward, because you asked, like, where do you sit now about it? And I think the big work that came up for me in this next birth phase, of this daughter was now realizing like so much of that was about like us. And I was still hadn't quite gotten to my own wholeness, honestly, because that was very much like we're a family. And where it really started to take shape during this process was kind of more about me and my personal wholeness, because I think I did identify pretty strongly with being a partner, being a wife. And so at this phase, a lot more came up around like, like everything from anger at some of the patriarchal notions of a wedding, right? And like, wait a sec, like, if this was a we and we brought her into the world, why are you walking her down the aisle? And why do you get to do the father of the bride speech? And no, you're not giving her away to this man. Like, but I hadn't thought of any of those things when I was getting married. I was just like, like going with the program. So, right. So, that was kind of my journey in it. So when I was rethinking about you're a family, whether you're a child or not, like what came up so strongly. And I had both kind of joyous and I'd say, some sadness, some pain at realizing how I hadn't been thinking to myself, like, and I'm also a woman, whether I have a child or not. And that's something that's become very strong. And the work that I'm doing is, inviting women to really claim that when it's a myth in our culture, still pretty strong. Yes. Not maybe as same as it was 100 years ago, but it's, not as far as along as I'd like it to be, that no, my purpose on this planet isn't, to spawn children, like it's a beautiful thing that I can do if I choose, but it isn't who I am. Right. And I'm not just a woman if I do. So those were some of the things that then like kind of recapitulated and I got to go look at more individually and deeper.
So there were two things that I'm hearing you talk about, both the conception story and the giving your daughter away, quote unquote, the becoming the mother of the bride, the transition to empty nester. There are two things that I was hearing, and I think they're intertwined, but I don't even know how to find the way in which they are intertwined. So maybe you can help me with this. The first is that there feels like there's a bit of a bookending to the identity. First, I become a mom, and then I graciously launch my daughter into the world, and she starts her next family. And the second is the concept of that maiden mother crone, which is present in so much of the theology and the literature in Western cultures. The two seem similar in that maybe we're really lean into this concept that you have to be a mother first. And who are you when you're not, either before you've had a kid or if you choose not to have a kid or after they've left your home? Can you help me, as the expert in mothering, untangle some of that?
Yeah. And I love, you bringing those together, because I love the archetype of the maiden mother crone. I think obviously it isn't necessarily exactly when a woman, starts her menses, she becomes in the mother phase, and prior to that, maiden. But, I think there's something ancient and archetypal about it for us to consider that phase, because now that I'm in what I would consider the crone phase, which, by the way, like crone and hag, like so many words have been, I don't know, everything from demonized to, like made ugly or whatever, but it's more like wise woman. It's not like old shriveled up, useless person. Like
we've
wait,
really
kind of thing.
disempowered that stage of life, going through menopause and becoming, like you said, the wise woman, the elder who can guide and support other generations.
So first, like how I hold it for myself, I think of those years where we're in the mother phase as we're more focused with our caring, right? Like we're putting it toward a career, we're putting it toward a child, and it might be both, but it really is, the challenge that's in it is keeping my identity, keeping a sense of myself and taking care of myself because I'm putting so much energy into these things that I care about, right? And it's, I think, very specific, more so where that energy goes, where what I'm realizing, it's kind of like, oh, now I get to mother the world, right? Like now
that's cool.
I get to, and I do feel that way. Like my scope is bigger, right? It isn't like I'm annoyed at the thought of like narrowly focusing it almost in a way. Like, oh God, I see parents with young kids. I'm like, how did I do that? Because it's so different now. But I just like thinking of it that way, right? Like we can, wrap our arms around so much more, than, and not like that was wrong it's not like that was bad. It's just a different place for your energy.
It's different. And it actually mimics what I've heard from a lot of people who choose to be child-free, who say, I don't need children in my life. And there's misperception that community gets. And I know you coach people who are making that choice. So I'd be curious to hear your reaction. But from my conversation with people who choose to be child-free is A, there's a misperception that you're not feminine or that you're not mothering or that you're not like compassionate. And B, there's a celebration of here I can show up as a better friend because I've got the time and capacity and resources to do that. I can show up as the best aunt possible. I can mother myself and the people that I love in a different way. I can give my whole heart to a philanthropic cause and mother the world in that way. So I do think there's something very special about having that capacity where, to your point, when you are the adult responsible for young children, it has to be very narrowly focused.
No, if I could add to that, because you're right on, and I agree, and I think that's an interesting, like the women I coach who've chosen not to have children, it's a bit of both, right? Like because usually they're super excited, like a woman I coach, like her and her husband love supporting each other in their careers, and they just value that they can put their energy toward that. And just like you said, as aunties and uncles, and friends, and really starting to like see the value in that. Right. And then, they wonder, and we're like, without that kind of explicit, like, oh, okay, so now my kids left the house and now I have this, like the kind of typical marking point. What's that going to feel like? But my perception is there is also kind of these just physical, emotional, spiritual, like things that happen anyway, whether you have children or not, that puts you in a different phase. But what I'm holding is, and they may be better prepared for it because they've kind of been doing both, right? Like they are already more in that space of like, have this kind of expansive energy and not focusing. But usually during that phase where we are more focused on some specific endeavors, whether it's a career, philanthropy, and whatnot. So it's kind of a both and.
I'm reading the book From Strength to Strength by Arthur Brooks, which is about knowledge workers and this period, the shift that you make as a knowledge worker from being in it and really creating and generating work to there's a point where the plasticity in your brain isn't the same. I'm doing a terrible job paraphrasing this, but where you shift to the next phase of your career and it's more about guiding, coaching, and supporting others.
That
and
makes total sense. Yeah.
Total sense. And his research is all about like it's very well researched, but what I haven't heard, and I haven't finished the book, I have a suspicion that there's some hormonal connection to your brain's plasticity.
That's what I think too.
Yeah. And so when you're talking about this transition to the next phase of your life, whether you have kids or not, it sounds like what you're saying is from going deep into giving your all to something, your career, kids, both, your husband, your wife, whatever it is, to let's take a step back and give in a more broad sense, which is kind of cool.
I think so too. Yeah. I think it's cyclical, hormonal, all those things. And Unfortunately in our culture, we're so cut off from those cycles of life that, it can get confusing. I don't think our Western culture honors the aging process, and the gifts that it holds. It's all like, stay young, be this, like.
I mean, the fact that Botox has now become so prevalent in the 20s, early 20s,
I just couldn't even stand it. I know.
We've been using your experience from the conception of your daughter to now this moment of launching her into the world, launching her into her next family through her wedding, that like ritual ceremony of getting married, to talk very conceptually. And I think we've got one more big picture concept to ask about. And then I want to dive into some of your coaching work and really get into the nitty gritty of that. But the concept is you've taken the word mother as your life's work, and you're teaching people and working with this word and helping to sort of rewrite what it means on an individual level and on a bigger picture level. Can you talk to me a little bit about this word? Why does it have so much weight? What is your intention in working with the word? And what does it mean for you?
Yeah. Thanks. So when I did my doctoral studies and I decided to do it on the transformational opportunity in motherhood, right? And really kind of paint a picture and look at what does that mean? What does that look like? And I met with and did a curriculum evaluation study with a group of women who did not have children. So I called it Preparing for Motherhood, which was what the study was about. So, and I just kind of threw in there. It wasn't like I didn't intend it to be a big part of but I just wanted to name something that had rung true for me when I heard it, in the work in my own coaching, and which was that all women mother. Right. So I'm talking to these women that may or may not have children. They were more in that like deciding or on the precipice of, but just to put out there, this resonates with me. So I want to really put that out, that all women mother. We conceive, create, give birth to children is kind of one of the more obvious, but also careers, dreams, ideas, relationships, pets, where like we were talking about, wherever we put our energy, but that the most important person we need to mother is ourselves. Right. So, but the response I got from them of just like, like everything from relief to, like what a gift to think of it that way. And also some like maybe a little bit of like, well, what do you mean? Or that's not really true. Or, like, no, that sounds nice, but really the only thing you mother is a child. So then I made the distinction as I kept going with that. In my mind, it helped me to then distinguish motherhood as the journey to decide to have a child, right? Like, so motherhood being having a child, mothering is that bigger definition and concept of like all that we mother that, isn't even relegated to women only, right? Like men, women, it's a verb, it's a powerful value. It's, an energy, it's a space, it's, a space where creation takes place. I call it kind of the cosmic aspect of rewriting the mother code, right? Like just expanding that definition and having it be more inclusive, but also, potentially life-giving is the phrase that's coming up for me.
I'll pause and jump in for a second because that resonates with me in two levels. One is, I think I had this sort of crisis personally before having my son around, I really wanted to be a mother in the traditional sense. And I was really discrediting the way in which I was mothering, according to your definition, in many other ways, by creating things, by launching new business ideas, by supporting the people that I love, by having lots of animals in my life. And it wasn't until I stepped through that threshold into mothering that I could look back and say, oh, wait, I've always been doing this. It didn't necessarily have to be in the giving life to or giving parental support to a child. But there was a point at which I was in crisis over that. And I wish I had had your definition, because it might have led me to, going back to the shopping cart analogy, felt more satiated or fulfilled with where I was at the time that I was struggling with who am I going to be? How am I going to build my family? So on behalf of people who might be feeling that way, thank you for this expanded definition.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I love how you then brought it back to like, oh, that might have helped me kind of discern or lessen some of the anxiety, of like, oh, I have to, right? I like, this is a should, or I have to. And how do I sort out like, what's my real desire around this? What's like a deeper yearning or hunger, and what am I trying to meet? What of those deeper hungers, and how am I trying to meet? And how will a child help me meet those, deeper yearnings, deeper hungers, or, my values that I'm inviting into.
And I got there eventually, but it was a long journey that I felt like I had to do all by myself. Well, the journaling, and I had some support, but it's important to have your voice and to have your coaching and have your podcast for people who are in that moment of transition.
Thank you. I'm, I have those moments where I'm like, it's kind of like this choice to give birth, to like keep giving birth to new aspects of it. But then you have to raise that child, which is I've been in the midst of, right? and these new. So thank you. Because hearing things like that is, I don't take it lightly. And it really spurs me forward to like do the hard thing, right?
We were talking a little bit about coaching, and you started with these beautiful descriptions of the people in your coaching circles or in your community who are choosing not to have kids. But that isn't where your coaching stops. You sort of serve women at all points of the spectrum in their motherhood journey. Can you talk to me about a little bit more about some of the other ways in which you support women around this concept of being a mother or mothering?
Yeah, absolutely. My passion is to support women in really making discerned choices wherever they are on their mothering journey, right? And wherever they are in approaching any of the questions that come up related to whether it's the big ones like have a child or not, right? And then how am I going to give birth, right? And how am I going to raise my child? So there's big ones, but there's a lot in between there. And, there are a couple of key things that no matter who I'm coaching, wherever they're at on that journey, whether in the throes of new motherhood or newly pregnant or deciding if they're going to, or at some phase, with or without children along the way, because just because you make this choice and then that choice happens doesn't mean there's going to be a lot of like, then, continued things that come up, as you know.
Yeah.
So, where it all kind of ties together is, and why I ended up calling it Rewrite the Mother Code is, in our culture and in our families, we have wired in codes, right? You talked about the plasticity of our brains and neuroscience and all of that. So, you're well aware that we're programmed beings, right? We come in with pretty, maybe a few things there from our conception and being in the womb, some wiring already begins. It's not, but the bulk of it happens in the first couple of years of life, right? And so, which is good news, bad news if you have a child. It's like, what do you mean? It's like, and by the time they're 6, it's basically done, right? And then you're just working with what you have. It's not a bad thing, but I don't remember when the first time I heard that as a mother, it was like, what do you mean? Like, oh my God, I really messed them up those first 2 years. But anyway.
Yeah, I'm just sitting here in a cold sweat, like, oh, but because it's scary and it's a lot of pressure. Yes. And I do want to talk about new moms in a minute, but I'll let you continue because that is intense.
But no, exactly. But all those choices, are informed, and we make choices out of like our reality and what's gotten wired in through our families, through our childhoods and through the culture that we're in. So no matter what, I really want to support women to unpack those, to really look at some pretty unconscious material. So, peeling away layers of that wiring, and then also the culture that we're in, like just kind of the big Western American culture, if that's where you are, whatever culture you're in. But then there's your community culture, if you're religious, that religious culture, and all of that is dictating your friends, your family, telling you like how it should be and what it should be. But peeling all that away so that you can then create a vision for yourself and make your as discerned of choices with as much information as possible, and ultimately make them your choice and mothering journey with whatever you choose. So that's ultimately like what I want and what I'm steering. And it's kind of organic, because ultimately like it's possible to have a mothering journey that's your own, that's fulfilling and that's transformative. And I think that's something that doesn't get talked about. Like we can actually learn and grow with our children or with who we decide to mother, that's a relationship that's there for me to learn and grow too, not just do for others.
Yeah, we sometimes think of it as static, and particularly in the portion of the conversation that I have where people are exploring, how do I become a parent if I want to be a parent, or what kind of family life is my family life? Mm-hmm. Sometimes for those people who yearn for a child, there's this sense that once the baby or the child is in my life, whether it's adoption or fostering or step parenting or whatever, then that's it. Right?
Yeah. Right.
That's the goal. We're done.
There's no instruction book. I shouldn't say that. There's like a zillion books on parenting. And I said, if anybody really was an expert in it, there'd be one book and one way to do it, but there's not, right? There's all these but we also don't go to school for it.
No, we don't go to school for it, and we should. And what we also don't recognize or go to school for is it's not just an outcome. It's an evolution. It's a progress.
It's a journey, right?
It's a journey.
Yes.
I've said this before, but my mom always goes, why does your generation always use the word journey? I said, because it works.
I know it is.
Yeah.
It's more feminine and more like yin.
Yeah.
Just like point A, point B, get here to there.
So I know we're running out of time here, but if you could tell me a little bit about those people who are experiencing the identity shift of new motherhood in the traditional sense of motherhood, meaning there's a child in your life in some capacity. What are some of the themes that come up in your coaching? What are some of the things that you're supporting that stage of evolution or your journey around?
Yeah. What I like to do, with those women is one, kind of just deal with what's so, right? Like this is new. Nobody prepares you for it. Like as much as I would say I'd like to prepare people more emotionally or like have a bigger, sense of it. It's like until you're actually in it, there's just no book, nothing can prepare you. Right. So it is, very individual, and to feel overwhelmed and, just to normalize and bring a space of like having compassion. So I think, there's so many brand new moms that like just immediately feel like they don't know what they're doing, or they're lost, or they're like, this is so much harder than they thought. Or even if it's beautiful and a lot's going well, there's questions that come up that like kind of, if it doesn't come up immediately, comes somewhere in those first 2 years about some big, what feels life or death. But you find out later, it's not, but that's okay. Yes. It's not quite as big a deal. So one, to me, that's kind of a time of like, how do you keep nurturing yourself, having, this compassion but also that, you're raw, you're open, you're vulnerable, like so much hormonal is just going nuts, in your system. And, if we're not used to having strong feelings, like we can get really scared and feel like, oh my gosh, there's something wrong with me because I'm feeling so intensely, or so scared or so upset or so, so this or that. And, to really try and hold a space and a container for women that it's okay to, to feel those, you're safe, and invite them to, and to have some spaces where, they can just totally surrender to those. Cause you immediately feel like, oh my God, now I got to hold it together. I got to be here for this baby. Yeah. And meanwhile, I'm going through so much myself. So it's this immediate first experience of them sorting through, how do I mother myself and give myself what I'm giving my baby?
That's beautiful and so important. There's one question that's been in the back of my mind that I've been itching to ask. And that is that we're talking about women. And we are very specifically talking about mothering in the context of being a woman. And yet, at the same time that you're rewriting the mother codes, there's this movement afoot to reshape fatherhood and masculinity and the male experience. What do you say to men who say, wait, there's a part of me that feels very creative. It feels like generative, like I can launch new ideas, new things, new companies. And also I can love my children fiercely and deeply. And in that way, I feel this feminine energy too. Is this mother code rewriting? Can it serve them? Is there a reason you're excluding the men from the conversation?
Yeah. Yeah. First of all, yes. And I really do hope to at one point be more explicit about like we're all mothers, men and women, everybody, and it's just one of those things where it's like narrow, you got to narrow your demographic and you can't speak to everyone. So I'm glad to have you say it because I really do feel that way, just as I feel, and at the same time, I will say like, oh my gosh, guys, like it's been all about you for so long. Like, okay.
Okay. Yeah.
I do have a tinge of that. I'm not going to lie. It's like, can we just kind of own this? But yes, we want you to have it too. And just like, I want to honor masculine values that are overvalued in our culture. Right. But and I coach plenty of women who it's like, but I like getting things done and doing and, and kind of being in that masculine energy. But like, no one's ever saying get rid of that. Right.
Yeah.
But you think the feminine values or mothering is like, oh, wimpy or not important or whatever. We're just looking at like reevaluating how we value those aspects, So for me,
analogies, you're saying that what I'm hearing you say, independent of whose gender it is the things that we have historically called masculine, we've overemphasized as a society, and the things that we've historically called feminine, we've underemphasized. And whether it's your gender or not, we 100%. Just need to, emphasize and call to the front the feminine qualities. And that's really interesting. It reminds me a little of the campaign Throw Like a Girl. You're just sort of rewriting, throwing like a girl is no longer a bad thing. Women and girls can throw really well or, play sports like a girl. And you're saying, do it like a mother. Like that's an awesome thing.
Right. And I, of course, want men to honor that aspect of their caring and, the feminine values and build on those and hold them just like, but for women, I think it's, and again, since it is like more our proclivity, you use those masculine in service of our caring, in service of our vision and, kind of that bigger feminine space. But to me, it's always about honoring those values and those aspects and yin and yang equally, right? Like, I love that yin yang symbol because, there's always a bit of in the masculine side, there's a circle within it of the feminine and, same, on the other side. It's like we all need both. Put it that way.
If that symbol were re-envisioned from an American cultural standpoint, the yang portion would be like 90%.
It is. Yeah. We actually in a seminar that I was part of, we like, just like, how does this feel? And like, cause this is the reality, cause the yang is the white part of the yin yang symbol. And it's like crushing, it's like on top of the little,
That's,
it just feels bad. It doesn't feel right. Right. It's like, it doesn't.
You're rebalancing the two.
Yes, totally. Harmony. We're looking for harmony between them.
Harmony. I love that. Okay. So if an audience member or somebody listening to this falls in love with what you have to say and says, you know what, I really want to learn more, where do they find you?
Sure. I love to send people to my website, drgertrudelyons.com, and it's DR, gertrudelyons.com, because there you can also sign up for my newsletter, which I put out a couple times a month that talks about like retreats and things that I'm doing and what's happening. And my podcast, Mother Rewriting the Mother Code, with Dr. Gertrude Lyons. So I would say I'm also on Instagram at Dr. Gertrude Lyons. So those are probably the three places I'm most out there. Yeah.
So it sounds like if you want a little taste, go for the podcast or the newsletter. If you want a bigger bite, then possibly a coaching session or program. Yeah. And if you want a really big bite, then join you in Mexico for one of your retreats.
Well, you just said it beautifully. I'm gonna say that next time. That
Absolutely. Well, it's such a pleasure to spend some time with you, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Oh, thanks so much, Julia. This has been just beautiful.
Thank you for listening to Stork'd with your host, Julia Carroll. This podcast is changing the conversation around the ways people define and create family. If you like what you hear, please support us by sharing with friends and following on Instagram at Stork'd_podcast. We also always appreciate it when you rate and review us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. For more information, visit storkedpodcast.com to sign up for our newsletter. That's STORKD podcast.com.